She was young, 19, bright, with dreams bigger than the small Texas town she called home. A girl who loved children, who took a simple babysitting job to make extra cash, never knowing it would lead her straight into the arms of a man twice her age. A man with power, a man with secrets, a man who would do anything to keep them buried. He wore a badge, a uniform, and a reputation built on trust. People looked up to him, respected him. His job, to uphold the law. But behind closed doors, behind the polished image, he was something else entirely. A predator, a manipulator, a man desperate to keep his double life from unraveling. At first it was just glances, compliments that lingered too long, late-night messages that blurred the lines between friendly and something else. She knew it was wrong. She knew the risks. But when someone in power tells you that you're special, when they make you feel wanted, it's easy to believe the lie. He made promises, told her she was different, that she mattered, that he would take care of her. Until one day the promise shattered, because she had news he didn't want to hear. She was pregnant. She thought he would do the right thing, that he would protect her, that, despite the secrecy, despite the lies, he cared. But caring would have meant consequences. It would have meant losing his career, his family, the life he had built. And for a man like him, a man who had spent years controlling the narrative, that wasn't an option. So he made a choice, not to confess, not to take responsibility, but to eliminate the problem. Cyanide, a poison so swift, so cruel, so final that within minutes her body would shut down. No second chances, no time to cry for help. A scentless, colorless execution disguised as a simple drink. One sip, and it was over. A sheriff, a young girl, a secret too dangerous to keep, and a crime so shocking that it would shake the entire community to its core. What happens when the man sworn to serve and protect becomes the very monster he's supposed to fight? What happens when justice itself is the one holding the murder weapon? And most chilling of all, how many times had he gotten away with it before? Summer 2019, Houston, Texas. The air was thick with heat, the kind that clings to your skin and makes the days stretch longer than they should. The kind of summer where everything moves slow, except for secrets. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people smile at each other in passing, where children ride their bikes until dusk, a storm was brewing. A storm that no one saw coming. At the center of it all was Tamika Johnson, 19 years old, bright, ambitious, with a future that promised more than the life she had grown up with. She was a college freshman studying to become a nurse, a profession built on saving lives. But in the end, she wouldn't get the chance to save her own. To those who knew her, she was kind, responsible, always willing to help. She had a laugh that made people feel warm inside, and a determination that made them believe she would make something of herself. She worked part-time to pay for her textbooks, picking up babysitting jobs to make ends meet. One of those jobs led her to Sheriff Derek Wilson, 42 years old, a husband, a father, a man who had spent decades earning the trust of his community. He wasn't just a sheriff, he was a symbol of authority, of respect. The kind of man people waved to at the grocery store, the kind who gave speeches at school assemblies about safety and responsibility. But behind the uniform, behind the polished exterior, was something darker. Tamika had been babysitting for the Wilson family for nearly a year. It started off innocent, watching his two young children while his wife, Sandra Wilson, worked long hours at a local hospital. Sandra adored Tamika, trusted her. She was everything you'd want in a babysitter, reliable, kind, good with kids. Then something changed. Derek started coming home earlier than usual, sitting with Tamika after the kids went to bed, striking up long conversations about life, about dreams. He told her things he probably shouldn't have, about how he felt trapped in his marriage, about how lonely he was, about how she made him feel alive again. At first, she brushed it off. He was her employer, a married man. But then, the lines started to blur. Compliments that felt too personal, a touch that lingered a second too long. Text messages late at night that had nothing to do with the kids. By the time she realized how deep she was in, it was too late. Their affair was never supposed to happen. She knew it was wrong, and so did he. But Derek was the kind of man who took what he wanted. And Tamika, young, vulnerable, flattered by the attention, became tangled in something she couldn't escape. Then everything changed. Tamika was pregnant. She had spent days rehearsing how to tell him, going over every possible reaction in her mind. Would he be angry? Would he deny it? Would he do the right thing? But when she finally worked up the courage to say the words, his face hardened. The warmth, the charm, the affection, it was gone in an instant. Tamika wasn't just a fling. She wasn't just a mistake to be erased. She was carrying his child, and she wouldn't be swept under the rug. So she gave him an ultimatum. Tell your wife, or I will. She thought she had power. She thought she could force his hand. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. Derek Wilson wasn't the kind of man who let people dictate his life. He had spent years building his image, protecting his reputation. He was respected, untouchable. A scandal like this, it wouldn't just ruin his career, it would destroy everything. And Derek Wilson wasn't about to let that happen. What Tamika didn't realize, what she couldn't have realized, was that from the moment she threatened him, she wasn't just his problem. She was his target. And in Derek's world, problems didn't get fixed. They got eliminated. Their affair started off with a compliment here, a joke there, a lingering glance that lasted just a second too long. At first, she brushed it off. Men flirted sometimes. It didn't mean anything. And Derek was Sandra's husband. He was off limits. But then came the nights when Sandra worked double shifts at the hospital, and Derek came home early. He started sitting with her after the kids were asleep, talking to her, confiding in her. Sandra doesn't look at me the way she used to, he admitted one night, swirling the ice in his glass. She's always too tired, too busy. It's like I don't even exist anymore. Tamika didn't know what to say. She was young, naive, flattered by the attention. She told herself it was just talk, but deep down, she knew better. The first time he touched her, it was subtle, his fingers brushing against hers when he handed her a drink. The first time he kissed her, it was unexpected, so fast she barely had time to process what was happening. The first time they slept together, it was a mistake. The second time, she stopped calling it that. Weeks passed, then months. Their secret meetings became routine. Stolen moments in his matrimonial bed, kitchen, bathroom when Sarah is at work. Derek was everything she wasn't supposed to want, but she wanted him anyway, until she got pregnant. The day she found out, her hands shook so badly that she dropped the test on the bathroom floor. 2 pink lines. She was terrified, excited, conflicted, but deep down she knew one thing for sure. Derek had to know. She told him the following night, waiting for the kids to go to sleep before sitting him down at the kitchen table. I'm pregnant. He didn't say anything at first, just stared. The warmth in his eyes flickered, then vanished. That's not possible, he muttered, shaking his head. You've been with someone else. Tamika's chest tightened. No, she whispered. It's yours. He pushed back his chair, pacing the kitchen. His hands raked through his hair. His breathing was sharp, unsteady. This can't happen. It already has. She told him she wasn't getting rid of it. She expected anger, maybe even disappointment. But what she didn't expect was how quickly he shifted into fixing mode. First, he offered her money, enough to cover the procedure, enough to make it all go away. When she refused, he switched tactics. What if I left Sandra? He asked, his voice suddenly softer, almost gentle. We could be together for real. No more sneaking around. Tamika felt something tighten in her chest. You're lying. I'm not. He reached for her hand. "But if Sandra finds out like this, it'll ruin everything. I just need time. Let me handle it the right way." For a brief moment, she wanted to believe him, but Derek had spent his whole life controlling situations, not fixing them. She saw it in his eyes, in the way he carefully measured every word. He wasn't looking for a solution. He was looking for a way out. And she wasn't going to let him find one. So, she gave him an ultimatum. "Tell your wife, or I will." For the first time, she saw something in Derek that terrified her. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't panicked. He was calculating. He didn't yell, didn't beg. He just sat back, his face unreadable, and said, "You have no idea what you're doing." And then he left. Tamika thought she had won. She thought for once she was the one in control. She had no idea what was coming next. Tamika thought she had backed him into a corner. She thought he had no choice but to come clean, to own up to what they had done, to face the consequences. But she underestimated one thing. Derek Wilson wasn't the kind of man who faced consequences. He was the kind who buried them. The night after Tamika gave him the ultimatum, Derek sat alone in his home office, the glow of his laptop screen the only light in the room. His wife and children were asleep, unaware that, just feet away, the man they trusted was carefully calculating murder. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He knew he couldn't make mistakes. Every step had to be careful, controlled. He couldn't use a gun, too messy. He couldn't stage a robbery, too risky. He needed something that couldn't be traced back to him. He needed certainty. And so he began to type. "How fast does cyanide kill?" A list of results appeared on the screen. He clicked on the first one. "Cyanide poisoning can cause death in minutes, interferes with the body's ability to use oxygen. Symptoms include dizziness, convulsions, cardiac arrest, often mistaken for heart failure." Perfect. Derek leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the article. A poison that acted quickly. A poison that mimicked natural causes. A poison that could be invisible if handled the right way. But where would he get it? That's when he realized he already had access. As sheriff, Derek had connections to forensic labs, crime scene investigations, and evidence storage. Cyanide was used in small quantities for controlled forensic testing. With his clearance, no one would question him taking a vial from the lab. And just like that, the plan started forming. By the time the sun began to rise, he had made his decision. Tamika wasn't going to be a problem much longer. The message came the next day. "Meet me at the diner. Let's talk." Tamika read it twice, her hands shaking. Derek hadn't texted her since their last conversation. She had assumed he was ignoring her, buying time. But now suddenly he wanted to talk. Her first instinct was to refuse, but then she thought, maybe he had come to his senses. Maybe he was finally going to take responsibility. Maybe, just maybe, she had won. She texted back. "When?" "Tonight, 8 p.m. Tamika exhaled, glancing at the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her, tired, anxious, hopeful. She smoothed her hands over her stomach. No matter what happened, she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the baby. That night, surveillance cameras at Miller's Diner captured Tamika walking through the entrance. She wore a simple white sundress, her hair tied back, her purse slung over her shoulder. She looked nervous, but determined. Inside, Derek was already waiting. He sat in a corner booth, dressed in his uniform, his badge still pinned to his chest, his service weapon at his hip. He looked calm, too calm. Tamika slid into the seat across from him. The footage didn't capture audio, but the exchange was tense. Her shoulders squared, her hands folded on the table. His body language was stiff, controlled, his fingers tapping against the ceramic coffee mug in front of him. The waitress came over. Derek ordered 2 drinks. Tamika's favorite, a caramel iced coffee. They talked for nearly 20 minutes. Then, the moment. Derek pushed the drink toward her. Tamika hesitated. Surveillance footage showed her lifting the straw to her lips. taking a sip. She smiled. Whatever Derek had said, she seemed to believe it. She thought things were finally working out. She had no idea that at that very moment, death was already inside her body. Less than 10 minutes later, she left the diner. Security cameras showed her walking to her car, fumbling for her keys. She paused, gripping the door handle. Something was wrong. Her head tilted slightly, like she was trying to steady herself. She blinked rapidly, stumbled. Then her body collapsed onto the pavement. Tamika Johnson never make it home that night. The poison had done its job. And Derek Wilson? He was already on his way back to his perfect life, his perfect wife, his perfect family, ready to play the grieving friend when the news broke. He thought he had planned the perfect crime. He had no idea what was coming next. Tamika Johnson never made it home that night. The sun rose over Houston the next morning, its golden light spilling over parking lots, sidewalks, and quiet streets. But inside her car, parked at the very edge of the Miller's Diner lot, the world had already gone dark. She was slumped against the driver's seat, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. Her fingers, curled around her phone, had gone stiff. Her lips were parted slightly, a thin trickle of white foam dried at the corner of her mouth. Her skin had taken on an unnatural grayish hue. Tamika Johnson, 19 years old, a college freshman full of dreams, was gone. The first person to notice something was wrong was a diner employee, a busboy. He had stepped outside for a cigarette break around 6:45 a.m. and noticed a car that hadn't been there the night before. It was parked awkwardly, slightly crooked, like someone had stopped in a hurry. As he approached, he knocked on the window. No response. He knocked again, harder this time. That's when he saw it. The way her body wasn't moving. The way her mouth hung open, her lips a strange shade of blue. He called 911 immediately. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. They pried the door open, checked for a pulse, and found nothing. But something wasn't right. At first glance, it looked like an overdose, maybe even suicide. A young woman found unresponsive in her car, no signs of struggle, no visible injuries. But there was something off about the scene. There were no pill bottles, no alcohol, no syringes, nothing that suggested she had willingly done this to herself. The only thing they found was her phone, still unlocked, resting on the passenger seat. The last text she had sent? To Derek Wilson. "I think we're finally going to be okay." She had been hopeful. She had believed she was walking into a future. Instead, she had walked straight into her own execution. The autopsy was conducted the following afternoon. The first red flag: her lungs. They weren't filled with fluid, like in an opioid overdose. There was no evidence of asphyxiation, no damage to her brain that suggested she had simply lost consciousness and slipped away. But when the doctor opened her stomach, he found something disturbing. A bitter almond smell. It was faint, but unmistakable, and it pointed to one thing: cyanide. When the toxicology report came back, it confirmed his suspicions. Tamika Johnson had ingested a lethal dose of cyanide, enough to shut her body down in minutes. It was deliberate, it was intentional, and it meant that someone had murdered her. How cyanide kills. Cyanide doesn't just kill, it shuts the body down from the inside out. It prevents cells from using oxygen, suffocating them even when the person is breathing normally. Within seconds, the victim feels dizzy. Within minutes, their heart begins to fail. News of Tamika's death spread quickly. For most people, it was a tragedy. For Derek Wilson, it was an opportunity. When the police came knocking, he played his role flawlessly, stunned, devastated, struggling to understand what had happened. He told them he had met Tamika for coffee the night before, that she had seemed fine, that they had talked about the future, and she had told him she was scared. And then he added something chilling. She mentioned she'd been feeling sick lately. a carefully placed seed of doubt, a way to make her death look like an accident. But he didn't stop there. He showed up at Tamika's funeral, dressed in black, standing beside his wife Sandra like a devoted family man. He hugged Tamika's mother, whispered condolences, even offered to help cover funeral costs. He looked like a man in mourning, but inside, he was celebrating. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought the perfect crime had been committed. But he had made one mistake. Tamika Johnson had been buried, but her story refused to stay in the ground. For days, detectives worked through routine procedures, trying to piece together the last hours of her life. Her autopsy had confirmed what some already suspected: cyanide poisoning, a murder, deliberate and precise. But suspicion alone wasn't enough to convict someone, especially someone like Derek Wilson. He was a man of the law, a sheriff, someone the community trusted. To point the finger at him without evidence? That would be impossible. And for a brief moment, it seemed like that evidence wouldn't come. But then someone stepped forward. Her best friend. A young woman who had known Tamika better than anyone, who had been there through all of it. The affair, the fear, the threats. She hadn't spoken out immediately. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the gnawing disbelief that Tamika was truly gone. But then she read back through her texts, and her blood ran cold. One message stood out from the rest. A message Tamika had sent just 3 days before her death. "If anything happens to me, look at Derek." There was more. Another text. This one even more disturbing. "He told me this secret dies with me." Not our secret. Not the secret. This secret dies with me. Tamika had known. Somewhere deep down, she had known that she was standing on a fault line and that one wrong move would send her plummeting. She had known what Derek was capable of, and she had been right. The text messages were enough to shift the investigation. Up until that point, officers had been careful, treating it as a suspicious death, but not officially calling it a homicide. They needed more. A trail. Something to tie Derek to the crime. So, they looked deeper. It wasn't difficult to connect the dots. Forensic scientists analyzed the cyanide found in Tamika's system, comparing it to the samples held in police storage. The chemical composition was a match. He hadn't just planned this murder. He had done it using the very system meant to uphold justice. And yet, Derek still walked free, because while the evidence was damning, there was still one missing piece. No one had seen him poison her. Until they checked the security footage. The diner where Tamika and Derek had met wasn't a high-end establishment. It was small, quiet, the kind of place where locals stopped for late-night coffee. No fancy security system, no obvious cameras. But there was one. A single camera mounted near the register, angled just slightly toward the booths. A camera no one ever paid attention to. A camera that, on the night of Tamika's death, had captured something critical. Derek, sitting across from her. Derek, reaching into his pocket. Derek stirring something into her drink before sliding it across the table. Tamika had picked up that cup, completely unaware. She had trusted him, even in that moment. She had lifted the cup to her lips, taken a sip, and smiled. Because she thought they were making peace. She thought she had finally found a way out. But the only way out, the only one Derek ever intended to give her, was death. The moment investigators watched the footage, it was over. A search warrant was issued for Derek's home. The clothes he had worn that night were found, washed but still carrying trace amounts of cyanide. His phone records placed him at the scene. And the texts, the internet searches, the security footage, they all told the same story. Derek Wilson, the sheriff, the husband, the father, the man who had sworn to protect his community, had murdered a young woman to protect himself. He thought he was untouchable. He thought no one would ever connect the dots. But now, every single thread he had tried to bury was unraveling, and his time was running out. There are some crimes that unfold in the heat of the moment, decisions made in seconds, regretted for a lifetime. But this was not one of them. This was calculated, planned, cold. Derek Wilson didn't act out of impulse. He didn't lose control in a moment of anger. He researched, plotted, and executed a plan that ensured one thing: Tamika Johnson would not live to tell her story. But the question remains, was there ever a moment when he hesitated? Did he sit across from her in that diner, watching her sip the poisoned drink and feel even the slightest flicker of guilt? Or had he made peace with his decision long before that night? For some, this was a clear-cut case of premeditated murder. The internet searches, the stolen cyanide, the carefully arranged meeting, every move pointed to a man who had planned this down to the last detail. There was no sudden loss of temper, no moment of uncontrollable rage. It was cold, calculated, and deliberate. But others raised a different theory. What if Derek hadn't gone to that diner intending to kill her? What if he had only meant to scare her, to make her sick enough to back down, to reconsider? Some argued that perhaps Derek had underestimated the cyanide, that he thought he was using a smaller, non-lethal dose. That maybe, just maybe, Tamika wasn't meant to die, just to be silenced in another way. But does that really change anything? The fact remains, Derek didn't call for help when she collapsed. He didn't rush to save her when the poison took hold. He let her die. And the reality is, this isn't just about one crime. How many times have men in power abused their authority to hide their sins? How many times have officers, those meant to uphold the law, used their status as a shield against justice? Tamika's death was not just about an affair. It wasn't just about a pregnancy. It was about power, about control, about a man who believed until the very last second that he could get away with it. And for a while, he almost did. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. Derek Wilson was arrested, his badge stripped from him, his name forever tied to the very crimes he once claimed to fight. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict? Guilty. The sentence? Life in prison without parole. Derek's wife filed for divorce immediately after his conviction. But she didn't stop there. She sued the department, claiming negligence, claiming that there had been signs of Derek's misconduct, signs of abuse of power, signs that were ignored because no one wanted to question the sheriff, because he was a man who knew the law, a man who thought the law did not apply to him. Her story is a warning, a reminder that secrets can be deadly, and the most dangerous secrets, the ones held by those in power. So I ask you, do you think Derek Wilson believed he was untouchable? And how many more like him are out there right now, still getting away with it? If you found this case disturbing, eye-opening, or important, make sure to subscribe, because the truth needs to be told, and the truth will always come out.